But I still do think it's funny how bro be thinking, but there's Nazis, they're all Nazis set. They're like, I can't prove it to you. They're not saying it directly, but I can, but they're Nazis. It's like, oh my God. Do you see why I say a lot of people are afraid to debate? Because they can't substantiate none of what they're saying. They can't. They come up here with this crazy Trump's a racist, he's the Antichrist. You ask them, all right, cool, prove it. They're like, go look on the internet. And I'm asking them, all right, cool, give me the news segment. Like, what segment did he do this under? What episode of Fox and Friends was it on? Like, give me something. I'm willing to hear you out, but you can't. Honestly, a lot of y'all fall for clickbait, and there's a lot of clickbait about Trump administration. Like, trust me, the most outrageous lies.
The Democrat Party, not at a superficial level. And I have the great guest for the entire hour, Julian Epstein. I've known Julian Epstein for years. He's former House Judiciary Committee Democrat Chief Counsel. He's a Democrat consultant, and he's about had it with the Democrat Party. But before I get to Julian, I want to talk about tariffs. I want to circle back. I touched on this maybe a year ago, 8 months ago, on this issue of tariffs and so forth, because I think there's a lot of confusion. I think we have a decision by the International Trade Court that is way offline, despite what some of these so-called experts say. Mm-hmm. This case will be in front of the Supreme Court in a matter of weeks. And I don't know the outcome, nobody does, but I want to get into this. As Thomson Reuters pointed out, in the early years of the American Republic, tariffs were the country's primary source of revenue. But the tariff of 1789, one of the first laws passed by the new federal government, was as much about protection as it was about raising money. The tariff imposed duties on a wide range of imported goods and helped to pay down the young nation's war debt. So right from the beginning, tariffs were critical for so many reasons. And we've had tariffs from then until today.
Yep.
Different types of tariffs, different extent of tariffs. We have promoted free market economics. We believe in free market economics, but tariffs have in fact played a significant role throughout our country, Republican, Democrat, the founders, President Trump. Alexander Hamilton, the first secretary.
I mean, we believe in free market and that whole free trade. Free trade is flawed. It's flawed as hell, but we practice it to our own detriment. I'll be real.
The Treasury was a vocal proponent of using tariffs to protect and nurture American industries. In fact, he believed that without such protections, the U.S. would remain dependent on British and European goods and would not develop its own manufacturing base.
I mean, damn, man, the forefathers, man, the wisdom that these guys had is very impressive because look where we're at now. It's like our forefathers warned us of this, but we walked right off the cliff into it. Like, actually, when you listen to a lot or you read a lot of the forefathers' literature, you honestly understand that. I mean, like, bro, we don't really listen to these guys because they kind of warned us about getting into other countries' problems. They warned us about letting free trade happen. They warned us about all this stuff, but we did it anyway. Like, goddamn.
Today, the President of the United States has been very concerned about the hollowing out of our industries and our manufacturing base. He sees what China's up to. China's no friend. He sees what other countries are up to. And he's trying to give a rebirth to the industrial might of the United States, build on what's here, so much of which has been exported to other countries. Mm-hmm. In the 1800s, tariffs were a key part of the process of industrialization in the United States. The post-war Civil War years saw a surge in industrial growth, particularly in the steel industry. A lot of us call this the second great industrial revolution, which really was the first great industrial revolution, 1870 to 1913. And during that period, a lot was going on, including the imposition of tariffs to give the country time to grow and to develop its own industries. Tariffs protected the American steel industry from cheaper European steel, allowing it to grow and prosper. And this protection was key in building a domestic steel industry that could compete with and eventually surpass European powers. The expansion of railroads, which were heavily supported by tariffs, was another transformative force in the American economy. The construction of railroads required vast amounts of steel, which the protected American steel industry could supply. This symbiotic relationship between tariffs, the steel industry, and the railroad expansion not only changed the physical geography of the country, but also facilitated the movement of goods and people. Well, it massively changed the country, expanded our boundaries.
I know, because all the steel being produced here that produced a lot of jobs, and we were self-sufficient. I mean, we didn't have to depend on no overseas, maybe work from overseas, but we didn't need no materials from overseas.
Expanded our industrial base. And from steel and railroads grew other industries, other businesses, and from there, The McKinley Tariff, that is the McKinley Tariff Act of 1890, named after its sponsor and future President William McKinley, raised tariffs on many imported goods to their highest levels up to that point. The average tariff rate on dutiable items increased from about 38% to 49%. The McKinley Tariff Act also included reciprocity provisions that allowed the government to negotiate trade agreements with other countries. These provisions were designed to reduce tariffs on certain goods in exchange for similar reductions by other nations, promoting more balanced trade relations. Now, even today, other nations have tariffs, and they have big tariffs.
Yep.
You got to wonder why.
Big long-term tariffs. Yeah. So that kind of goes against what Canada was saying. I mean, their long-term tariffs have done nothing but keep jobs in their economy. I mean, protect their domestic industries. So why can't tariffs do the same for us? Oh, because the corporate elites that are funding this propaganda against tariffs told you so.
If they're not useful, if they're regressive, then why do they do it? We've had a lot of tariffs. As a matter of fact, I want you to look at this graph as I discuss this and as we scroll through it. How many tariff acts and trade acts have we had? 1789, 1790, 1791, 1792, different tariff acts. 1816, 1824, 1828, 1832, 1833, 1842,
God damn, it's a lot of tariffs.
1846, 1857, 1861, 1872. Tariffs. 1875, 1883, 1890, the McKinley Tariff. 1894, 1897, 1909.
And guys, you'd be very surprised at how much minerals we really don't need. Like rare earth minerals, we got them too. Now, the problem is refining rare earth minerals. If you look it up, refining rare earth minerals is very heavy on, well, the environment. And because, we care about our people and the environment over here in America, we do leave it to people who don't care about their environment or people like China. Yes, yeah, the rare earth refinery hurts the environment I would say, in a significant way. So that's one of the reasons why we kind of gave it up to China, even though I disagree that we shouldn't have done that. I mean, we could have just built these rare earth refineries and made sure that nobody lived around them, that there was proper safety precautions to make sure people weren't getting cancer in the factory and that people who lived outside of it. Because that's what's going on in China. So, yeah, I mean, a good amount. We have the rare earth minerals, but refining them is a taxing on the environment and anybody that's around there. We ain't trying to have cancer patients just proliferate out of nowhere.
1913, 1921, 1922, 1930, 1934. Why am I reading them when you can see them on the screen? Just to show you, to emphasize how often we use tariffs. 1947, 1962, 1974, 1979, 1984, 1988, 1994, 2002, 2009, 2018, 2025. Look, you don't have to love tariffs.
2009 Chinese tariffs. Wasn't that Obama? Crazy.
Tariffs, you might not even like tariffs. I'm going through the history of this country. The greatest economy on the face of the earth. The biggest.
Now, I remember that. I think Chinese tires was flooding the market like crazy. And like, bro, the tire companies just could not keep up. Like, these are ultra cheap tires, and these tire companies were getting decimated by it. So, I mean, shout out for Obama for putting tariffs on Chinese tires. Like, that was very smart.
Superpower on the face of the earth. I'm explaining it. Again, I would argue that tariffs aren't what built this country. Capitalism is what built this country. But tariffs were used by presidents of every party in every period of American history to try and give a breather to allow our industries to develop, because other countries, in many respects, were taking advantage of our country, as Donald Trump talks about all the time. Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little about the law and the Constitution. In dozens of statutes, Congress has authorized the president, as you heard, to adjust tariff rates in response to specific trade-related concerns related to U.S. foreign policy and national security interests, or that required administrative finding by a U.S. agency. For example, Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act of 1962 empowers the president to adjust tariffs on imports that threaten to impair U.S. national security. Section 5B of the Trading with the Enemy Act and Section 203 of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act empower the president in a time of war or national emergency to regulate imports. Section 201 of the Trade Act of 1974 empowers the president to raise tariff rates temporarily when the U.S. International Trade Commission determines that a sudden import surge has caused or threatened serious injury to U.S. industries. Congress has also empowered U.S. agencies to impose duties to offset certain injurious trade practices. Does the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, this is the crucial act right now that's being fought over in the Supreme Court, empower a president to impose or modify tariffs on other countries? The act's language is very broad. A president is authorized to, quote, deal with any unusual and extraordinary threat which has its source in whole or substantial part outside the United States to the national security, foreign policy, or economy of the United States if the president declares a national emergency with respect to such threats. The act goes further, authorizing a president to, quote, regulate importation. The Supreme Court has said courts should not second-guess a president's decision to trigger a determination of an emergency authority. And I would add, there is nothing that stops the president from dealing with balance of payment issues under the 1977 Act, in addition to national security.
And I always just say, like, majority of Trump's tariffs are covered under the Trade Act. And I would just say they straw man Trump's argument for tariffs by just saying it was part of the Economic Emergency Powers Act. It's like, no, it wasn't all done under that. It was definitely done under a lot of sections of the Trade Act, especially Section 3. What was it? I think it was 232.
Issues, despite what the International Trade Court ruled, because I read the act myself. Now, what else? Non-delegation doctrine. That is, Congress cannot delegate its core functions to the executive branch on separation of powers grounds. I would argue Congress is doing no such thing. The president, under Article 2, is in charge of foreign policy. That includes trade.
Yep.
In 1934, Congress passed the Reciprocal Trade Agreements Act, which gave President Franklin Roosevelt the ability to change tariff rates by 50% and negotiate bilateral trade agreements without additional approval from Congress.
So, yeah, it's looking like this tariff Supreme Court case is a shoo-in. Because, I mean, bro, Congress has already appropriated all power to the president in the past to handle tariffs. It's just that people are kicking and screaming that Trump's doing it.
Why? Well, you look at Congress right now. The Democrats closed the government. The Republicans have very small majorities. The framers understood this. This is why national security and foreign policy issues, the president is a commander-in-chief, with some input from Congress, no question. But quick decisions, emergency decisions, fundamental decisions, you have an executive branch. Congress still has the power to pass legislation, has the power of the budget to withhold monies for certain acts by the executive branch, but sometimes decisions have to be made. So to me, there was no non-delegation issue, this 1934 Act, or to the Supreme Court. On August 15, 1971, President Nixon issued Proclamation 4074, in which he declared a national emergency and imposed a 10% ad valorem supplemental duty on all dutiable articles imported into the United States, all of them. The United States Court of Customs and Patent Appeals, which is the predecessor to this International Trade Court, held in United States versus Yoshida International that Nixon had such power under the Trading with the Enemy Act. The point is, there was no...
The point is that Congress has already appropriated power to the president to handle tariffs pretty much as he please. As he please within certain time limits. So all this stuff about Trump being unconstitutional with tariff is all going to fall apart in the Supreme Court arguments. Because they can bring up all these examples of, well, presidents doing so and all the laws in which Congress have gave the president power. I mean, before a lot of us was even born.
Non-delegation issue. No separation of powers issue. The Trade Act of 1974 gave additional powers to the president to negotiate tariffs and non-tariff barriers without congressional approval unless an agreement contains non-tariff barriers. Again, I'm focused here on the non-delegation issue. That was found to be a non-delegation non-issue. In other words, not a separation of powers issue. The Congress was not conferring to the president its core powers. Now, surely the Supreme Court justices, some of whom no doubt watch this show, will understand that Congress is not without power of its own. It can change the law. It can withhold funding. There's things Congress can do. Rather than an issue of non-delegation, I see.
But as far as stopping Trump from imposing tariffs, it's too late. Congresses before you have already gave it to the president. It is too late.
This is a question under the political matter doctrine, where the two elected branches of government duke it out, thereby reversing these lower court interventions. In other words, Supreme Court, in my humble opinion, you should reverse these lower court decisions, tell the lower court under the political matters doctrine that they should not get involved, that if Congress feels that certain of its powers are being seized by the executive branch, Congress has the power to seize them back.
Yeah.
Give and play. Otherwise,
but they know they ain't gonna get that off because, well, Republicans have majority rule, so they're not gonna sit there and talk about, all right, well, let's make a law kind of pulling back the president's power to, impose tariffs. I mean, unless you guys can get that done with the Republican majority rule, I doubt it. But unless y'all get that done, Trump can do whatever he wants. But the law has already been set by Congress that Trump can do whatever he wants with these tariffs, especially in 1974. I mean, y'all really gave it to the president after that.
All kinds of presidential determinations will be subject to not only judicial review, but judicial tyranny, which we see right now on the lower courts, where a handful of unelected judges who do not have access to the kind of information necessary to make decisions about foreign policy, national security, international trade. These judges have like 2 or 3 clerks. They don't have the capacity to make these decisions, let alone they don't have the constitutional authority to substitute their decisions for that of a president. They will be interposing themselves into fundamental decisions the Constitution's framers left to the president. And if people think the president doesn't have that authority, then Congress can try and act as well. That said, Congress can act if doing so violates the president's Article 2 powers with respect to foreign policy and national emergencies, which would be a violation of separation of powers too. So these two elected branches duke it out, and we'll see where it goes. But there's really no reason for the courts to intervene just because you have plaintiffs in industries who are complaining. There are big issues here. And if the court gets it wrong, we're now going to have a phalanx of radical activist federal district judges and Article 3 judges making decisions that they have no authority to make and no knowledge base to make. Now, Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was a great president. The economy exploded under Ronald Reagan. It grew by 25%. His tax cuts were massive. Donald Trump has Ronald Reagan's portrait hanging in the Oval Office, and not just hanging somewhere, over his left shoulder. 2 tremendous great presidents. And what did Ronald Reagan do? You know, the Cato Institute is a fairly libertarian organization, maybe extremely libertarian. They were not happy with Ronald Reagan in 1988. They put out a policy analysis called Cato Institute Policy Analysis number 107. The Reagan Record on Trade, Rhetoric versus Reality was written by Sheldon Richman. And to cut to the chase here, what did old Sheldon have to say? A 100% tariff was placed on selected Japanese electronic products. The health and vitality of the U.S. semiconductor industry are essential to America's future competitiveness, said Reagan. We cannot allow it to be jeopardized by unfair trading practice.
And so funny, I played that video. I played the full 5-minute address from President Reagan. And he said it. He's like, look, I'm usually not the fan of just trying to throw on tariffs on people, but Japan is operating unfairly. And he says, I'm going to use tariffs anytime we have trade deficits or there's unfair trade policies. So even Reagan would agree with what Trump is doing with these tariffs, if you listen to the full address.
One of the many ways Reagan embraced trade restrictions was through the imposition of a special 45% tariff over a 5-year period on top of a regular 5% duty on Japanese heavy motorcycles as a favor to Harley-Davidson. Harley-Davidson was going under. Again, he felt they needed a temporary period of time to survive because the Japanese were flooding our market with their motorcycles. Reagan stepped in with tariffs. In testimony before the Senate Finance Committee on July 17, 1987, Yider, who was the trade representative, called Section 201 of the trade law, which permits the president to grant industries relief from imports even without an allegation of unfair trade practices, even without an allegation, an important cornerstone of U.S. trade law that should be used vigorously in appropriate cases.
Yep, see, told you. I mean, y'all already handed over so much power to the president in the 70s, it's already a wrap. Unless you guys want to go ahead and run, revoke the Trade Act of 1997, 1974, then, well, I'm gonna be real with you. Your case on Trump is, unconstitutionally handing out tariffs is cooked, is dead, is no longer an argument. I mean, look, if you want to go ahead and blame the congressmen of the 1970s, go ahead, but that'd be a bit petty.
And it was by the Reagan administration. They bragged about it. What else did they say? They said, for the first time, unfair trade practices have been formally investigated on the administration's own motion, resolved in most cases, and retaliated against when necessary. They said a record number of market opening settlements of unfair trade cases has resulted from unprecedented use of presidential unfairness determinations and threats of retaliation, while counter-retaliation by foreign government has been minimized. They said textile import quotas have been negotiated or imposed in record numbers and with unprecedented degrees of restraint. They were bragging about this. They said of the recommendations presented to the president under Section 201 of the Trade Act, 2/3 have resulted in import relief, far higher than the record of prior administrations. They said rigorous enforcement of anti-dumping and countervailing duty laws, strongly supported by the president, has resulted in a record number of orders for offsetting duties. To emphasize the point, this letter that they sent to Congress, bragging about their acts, we find it deeply ironic that Congress would respond to this unprecedented use of presidential discretion by restricting the discretion of future presidents. We cannot accept the premise that the test of a tough trade bill is the extent to which it removes presidential discretion. The opposite is true, said Reagan. They forced Japan to accept restraints on auto exports. They tightened up.
Oh, guys, the call-in link is still open. I'm still willing to take calls from naysayers. So please go to the front, go to my main page, go hit that call-in link, go the StreamYard link, and come up here, and I'll be happy to hear you out for about 10 minutes. Appreciate the support. Or, I would say I'd appreciate you coming up and sharing why you disagree.
Considerably the quotas on imported sugar, negotiated to increase restrictiveness of the multi-fiber agreement and extended restrictions to previously unrestricted textiles. The Reagan administration unilaterally changed the rules of origin in order to restrict textile and apparel products and so forth and so on, much more than that. And they put pressure on Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea, the largest exporters of textiles and apparel to the United States, to limit their exports to the United States. They required 18 countries, including Brazil, Spain, South Korea, Japan, Mexico, and on and on and on, to reduce steel imports, guaranteeing domestic producers a share of the American market. When 3 countries not included in the 18, Canada, Sweden, and Taiwan, increased their exports, the administration demanded talks to check the increase. It imposed tariffs and quotas on their specialty steel. It imposed a 5-year duty beginning at 45% on Japanese motorcycles, raised tariffs on Canadian lumber and cedar shingles, forced the Japanese into an agreement to control the price.
I mean, now we're not even protecting our lumber industry. We kind of just left it to Canada. And we can, like I said, we can easily take that away.
Of computer memory chip exports and increased Japanese purchases of American-made chips. What else? Pressed Japan to force its automakers to buy more American-made auto parts. Demanded that Taiwan, West Germany, Japan, and Switzerland restrain their exports of machine tools, with some market shares rolled back to 1981 levels. Accused the Japanese of dumping roller bearings because the price didn't rise to cover a fall in the value of the yen. The U.S. Customs Service was ordered to collect duties equal to the so-called dumping margins, redefine dumping in order to make it easier to bring charges of unfair trade practices. And I can go on, but I won't. And the Reagan administration was one of the most free trade administrations in American history.
I like when Mark Levin talks about, the Constitution and history. Now, I hate when he talks about, foreign policy, because, man, this man's it's a wild one when it comes to that. I just always disagree with him on that. But when it comes to stuff like this, he's cooking. He's cooking, because a lot of people don't understand the history of tariffs. And then they also don't understand how Congress have already gave the president powers. Like, honestly, he already gave Trump so much power. They already gave Trump so much power with tariffs. It's crazy how this is even an argument. All you gotta do is go back to the 1974 Trade Act, and you can read that and you'll see, the president has every right to impose these tariffs without Congress, because Congress already gave him the power to. Now, if Congress want to go back and take it back, they can do that. But for some reason, they want to try to bring it up to the Supreme Court so they can get grilled on rulings that an old Congress made years ago. I mean, it's kind of their fault.
As is the Trump
And maybe they don't know history. Maybe.
administration. Even with the tariffs. Even with the tariffs. I could go on, but I won't. Maybe another day.
Hey, Sean